Hi everybody, and welcome to my latest episode of Mrs. Mummypenny Talks. And I have another guest for you this week, and it is my friend Catherine Morgan, who is the founder of the Money Panel. And she's got a business. We have a lot of shared objectives with our businesses, so we can have a lot of very motivated, exciting conversations, particularly about women and finance, because I think we're both very, very passionate about sharing the financial message with as many people as possible, but particularly women who struggle to get to the core basics of finance. And I think that's what we both do very well with our businesses. So welcome to the podcast. Great to have you. And can we start off with share a bit about your journey and your story and how you've got to the point you've got to now and why you do it?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Lynn. Thank you for having me today. It's a pleasure to be on somebody else's podcast and to know another personal finance podcaster, because there's not many of us around. So
there really aren't, but particularly women. Actually, there's. I'm gonna say, is it maybe just you and I who are the ones with money podcasts? I think we are.
Yeah, there's a couple of my friends actually who are in the financial advice space. They've recently relaunched some really niche podcasting, the divorce space and helping people to kind of deal with grief and loss of a loved one and things like that. But yeah, there's definitely not many female personal finance podcasters. So yeah, we are.
And you just recently interviewed me, so now I'm interviewing you. But yeah, tell us about your story and where you've come from to get to now.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, we're on a real, well, I say we, I think you even asked me this question the other day, Lynn. Ever since I started my business, which I just started blogging about my experiences around money, my relationship with money. And the business is now growing where we have a team of people and we basically support women to help them to reduce financial anxiety and increase financial empowerment and resilience. And our mission is big. We have a big mission to equip and prepare 1 million women globally across the world. And so when we started building the business, we started fundamentally just producing content. So helping people to improve their relationship with money and then also learn the practical steps. Because I'm a huge believer in that if we combine understanding our relationship with money, what makes us do things or not do things, our habits, our behaviors, what we think about money, if we combine that with the practical education, that's when the magic happens. I don't think it's one or the other.
Absolutely, and so you need both, don't you?
Yeah, 100%, because everyone knows that, we should be spending less than we earn, all of those kind of educational factors. But if we haven't got the right mindset, we don't have the right behaviors, we don't have the right habits, then actually, even if we do know the knowledge, it doesn't always stick, or we don't always follow what we think we should be doing. So I am a massive believer in that. And my background's financial advice. So literally since I was 18, since day dot, really, I actually went to do law at university.
Okay.
And at the time I bought my first house when I was quite young. I had a car accident and it gave me a couple of £1,000 for a deposit for a house. And so I had a 97% mortgage in those days. I put down this few £1,000s from this compensation payout. I know it's ridiculous to look back on it now. And I bought my own house, and because of the financial commitment of buying a property at a young age, I was going to go to uni and study law. But I was kind of in that position where, like many people are, they don't really know what they want to do. So you just end up kind of following this path you think you should take. And I ended up going out to Australia for a year. I was out there for about 8 weeks, but I took a year out. And it was during that year that I was going to defer my place to go to university that I decided that I was going to emigrate to Australia, which is where my dad and my twin brother live. Okay. And I came back from this trip to Australia. I'd applied for this working visa, and I was working at the bank at the time as a mortgage advisor. And one particular day I came into work in my jeans. I'd just come back from holiday, and this guy walked into my office, my now husband, and it was literally love at first sight. We fell in love with each other really quickly, and I never went to Australia. And so what happened is I ended up working in the bank, and I worked there for 16 years. And during that time, I actually really enjoyed my work as a financial advisor. And it took me offshore. I worked in the Channel Islands for a few years. We got married over there and I had my family. And that was kind of the start of my journey into the financial services profession. And I really had a good time in that capacity. But what happened for me is that during my 20s, I'd carried over all this emotional baggage from my teenage years. And consequently, my relationship with money was terrible. I lived in my overdraft every month. I racked up £30,000 worth of consumer debt. And I was giving people advice on what to do with their money.
Yeah.
So you can understand that underneath all of that, I was burying my head in the sand. I felt huge amounts of shame and anxiety and fears and lots of negative emotions about myself, my self-worth. And it wasn't until one particular day, actually, when I was working out in the Channel Islands, and I must have been in my mid-20s at that point. It was just before I fell pregnant with my first son. And I walked into this coffee shop one morning and I picked up this leaflet for personal styling. And I went home that night and I said to my husband now, I said, I'd love to have a personal styling session done, because I had years of eating disorders. I always looked at everybody else, what everybody else was wearing, thinking that, well, if I feel better about myself, then surely that will make me happier. And so I had this personal styling session done with myself for my birthday, and it literally changed my life. That particular day, this lady came over to my house and she weeded out all my wardrobes, and I had like 12 wardrobes of clothes. That's what I spent my money on. That's the reason why I lived in my overdraft, because I thought that if I bought an extra pair of jeans, I'd feel skinnier and I'd feel happier with myself. And she left me sitting on this little red couch in Jersey, surrounded by bin bags worth of clothes. And I just cried my eyes out. And I remember thinking, finally, someone's given me the permission to get rid of all the stuff that I'd been hoarding for years and years. And it was a real light bulb moment. It was the start of my first business, actually, was then, I then trained to be an image consultant. I wanted to help other women to feel better about their bodies. And so I did all these color analysis and style consultations. And I did that as a sideline hustle business until we then moved back from the Channel Islands back to the UK. And then I fell pregnant with my second son. So it was like my side hustle business while I was at the bank. Yeah. And then when I came back to the UK, I fell pregnant with my second son. And when he was 5 weeks old, we almost lost him to bacterial meningitis. Mm-hmm. And it was during that time when I was in hospital with him that, again, I had another kind of light bulb moment where the doctors kept using a lot of jargon with me when I was in hospital. So when I took him into A&E, at the point where his skin was starting to mottle and he was grey and he wasn't really moving very much and his hands and feet were freezing cold, they put me on this wheelchair, wheeled me into resuscitation. And I remember thinking, oh my God, this is really serious. And they kept using all this jargon like sepsis. And I just remember thinking, what the hell is sepsis? Like, I think I know what it is, but I'm not 100% sure. And it was all the jargon that they were using when I was in hospital with him. When I came out of hospital, I was diagnosed with PTSD. And when I went back to work at the bank, I kind of sat there thinking, how many people feel like this about money? How many people feel that they don't understand the jargon? They don't understand the complicated products like pensions, for example. They don't understand the benefits of a pension because they just get all these stories about what pensions are and not actually understanding the reality. And it was like a light bulb moment for me. I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to just sell products. I want to empower women to have a better relationship with money. And that's when I then decided to leave the bank, leave the 16, 17 years behind me, and just start focusing on helping people to improve their relationship with money.
Amazing. That sounds like you had two really big light bulb moments, and that's quite interesting. With I think a lot of people, when they set up their own business, you do get that lightning bolt, that moment of this is my destiny, this is where I need to go. And I love that. But that's almost like that's the trigger of the doing what you really love, because that's what you're ultimately so passionate about as a person. And I'm a believer in almost like going with what your heart wants you to do rather than your head, because that is ultimately what's going to make you happy. And you'll want to do it every day. Yeah, you get up every day, and because you've got that core focus of that inspiration for your life. So
yeah, 100%. Like, it took me a long time to really understand what I really enjoyed about my work, and doing a lot of work around my values. And I actually went on a retreat a couple of years ago, and it was really, really inspiring to think about, because many of the values that we have are just inherited values.
Yeah.
We inherit them from our parents, or from grandparents, or family members. And so actually, when we think about what is important to us, the one thing that I knew was that any time, and someone said to me, like, list everything that you're really passionate about, what makes your heart light up, and then list all the things that make you mad. And one of those things was unjust. Like, anything that's unjust, if someone's doing something that's not right, or they're not acting out of integrity, or even if it's, like poorly children on TV, or a criminal that's not been locked up for something that they've done, like anything that's unjust to me really made me mad. And so when I went back to my work, I thought, okay, so how does that link into what I'm doing and how I'm helping people? And it was exactly that. And it's now taken me into that space of looking at aspects like financial abuse and financial trauma, and really understanding what sits behind people's decision-making processes, what makes people do things or not do things. And it's all that trauma piece, which for me had a huge impact on my life, of personal trauma, and going through that then helped me to think about, okay, so how can I help more people like me? And often people struggle with this. They struggle with, okay, so how do I find the right niche? How do I know who to work with? But actually often it ends up being just a mirror version of people like us that have been through a similar journey, because we know that we've helped ourselves, and we know how we can then use that to help other people.
Financial trauma is an interesting thing to discuss, isn't it? Because you've either got trauma that happened of younger in your life, when you're very impressionable and things can have a lasting effect, but then you've got trauma that can happen all throughout your adult life as well. And something that I've explored a lot recently is I suppose my upbringing to do with money, and what I learned from my parents and my environment. But then it's almost like, how do you reprogram those sort of learnings, those beliefs you have in your head? But then what do you do if you're in a situation now where you've still got financial trauma going on? And I know it's something that you are really passionate about and you focus on a lot. So if there's women, men listening to this that are feeling out of control about money, or there's maybe something that they know that's going on in the background that isn't right, like what I suppose what defines financial trauma or financial abuse as an adult, and how can somebody look to get some help?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think financial trauma and financial abuse are two different subjects. So let me talk about financial trauma first, and then I'll share the work I've been doing recently in the financial abuse space. So financial trauma, if we think of the word trauma in itself, trauma is a significant, where the brain goes into fight or flight. And so what happens is, often if it goes into all those emotions of burying our head in the sand, or fear, that often is where we just don't want to deal with that situation, so we just bury our head in the sand. So we're kind of flying away from the nest, so to speak. But the brain goes into fight or flight. Now, trauma in itself doesn't have to be something significant. So a lot of people think that, you have to have been abused, or you have to have lost a loved one or something to feel trauma. Trauma can just be something like redundancy, for example. That's a huge trauma. The loss of a loved one. Divorce is another big one for women in particular. The breakup of a relationship, the loss of a spouse, all of these different things. COVID-19 is another example of trauma. We're all sitting in a trauma state right now. We're all trying to deal with massive change that, let's face it, most of us don't like. The brain doesn't like change. The brain likes to look for evidence to support a belief that already exists. So we're all having to go through significant changes right now. So financial trauma can be things like divorce, redundancies. Going into debt is trauma. It's trauma to the brain because the brain doesn't know how to deal with it. And often people stay in debt cycles because it's familiar to them. And often we see these repeated cycles of financial trauma in debt, for example, because we're in debt. So what happens is we get some short-term motivation to get away from that situation. It's what we call we're driven by pain, away from the pain of being in debt. And I know you and I have talked about our debt stories before on our blogs together. And this was the same for me. And I think you would agree with what we were talking about the other week on my podcast for you as well, Lynn, is we have this short-term motivator of let's get out of this situation. So we get this motivation to start paying our debts down. And maybe after 6 months or so, that debt gets cleared. And then we feel motivated and we feel great. This is brilliant. But then we lose that motivation because the pain doesn't exist anymore because that overdraft is gone or that credit card has been paid off. And so we lose the motivation. And so we get back into debt again because the brain is looking for that motivation again to motivate us to move forwards. And so most people, when they're looking at their finances, whether it's trauma, redundancies, being in debt, these kind of situations, they look for that motivation, but they look for that motivation away from pain. And so when I kind of talk to people about getting out of debt, we've got to find the long-term motivators. What is the benefit of getting out of that situation? What is it you're working towards? What's the vision going forward rather than just looking at what decisions you've made in the past? Because debt is full of shame and guilt. We feel like, I'm a terrible person. I can't manage money very well. I've made really awful decisions. And all of that stores in the brain as trauma. So we have to learn to just, first of all, forgive ourselves for any decisions that we've made in the past, because it's gone. Like it's in the past, it's gone. And forgiveness is one of the first steps. If you're sitting in debt, for example, forgiveness is one of the first steps. Because not all debt is bad. You made that decision at the time because of whatever situation you were in. And so I think that's really important to just to bring your listeners to that attention and to that particular subject. So that's financial trauma. So and trauma can be very deep rooted. It can go right back to things that happen in our childhoods. It can sometimes just be something that one person said to you on one particular day. Maybe a school teacher that said, I remember my school teacher saying to me once, we don't do competitiveness in this school. And my mum actually pulled me out of that school and moved me to a different school. But the belief that left in me was that if I put my hand up in class, if I knew the answer, that was not a good thing to do. And so I then kind of reclused inside and didn't share anything. So it can just be sometimes one thing that somebody said and the brain's held on to that information and has kind of filed it away somewhere in your belief system, and then you make decisions based on those belief systems. So that's kind of financial trauma, and depending on the trauma depends on how your brain is supporting those beliefs, whether they're true or not true, and then the behaviors that are attached to that belief. Some of those traumas can be deeply rooted in much more significant trauma, such as financial abuse, for example. And this was an area that I've been looking into very recently, because there's a massive connection between women who want to be independent, not codependent with their finances, and they want to be empowered, they want to be independent, but they're not able to because they're in a relationship where they don't necessarily have those choices available to them. And this has become kind of quite something I've seen in my Facebook group, people talking about, and it's just kind of made me think, how am I supporting women in this situation who can't be can't be independent with their money because they've got this level of codependency?
Saying that they are in a situation they don't want to be in but can't get out of it because of the finances, or women actually saying I don't know, it's, how does financial abuse sort of manifest itself? There's so many different ways that it can happen, isn't there? There's actual restriction of money, so not being, maybe if a woman earns less money or doesn't have a job, that she has to ask for money. There's where a lot of accounts are all held in one partner's name, not the other. There's, I don't know, we can go on and on about the amount of, I was listening to a report on BBC News yesterday morning about the rise of technology and how technology is actually helping financial abuse to happen, where you can have apps that track exactly where you are and exactly what you're spending. So you can actually see what your partner is spending with a notification on a real-time basis, which gives you that sort of, oh, it's just
yeah, I mean, one of the biggest problems with financial abuse is that often we know that we're seeing an increase in like domestic violence and financial abuse because of COVID-19, for example.
Yeah.
So the more that the economy struggles financially, the more, unfortunately, we are going to see this increasing and becoming more of a challenge. And that was one of the reasons why I was kind of sensing a few conversations in between people in my group about this subject, and also another one which is to do with autism. What happens if you've got an autistic child or somebody who can't deal with money in the way that they want to? So that's another area we're looking to develop some support for those members who may be autistic themselves or have autistic children. We've got somebody coming on the podcast in a few weeks to talk about that. But financial abuse in the context of money, there can be some really big red flags and warning signs. So things like, for example, it could be where you've got money in one person's name and it's not shared equally. It might be where the partner doesn't have access to any of their paperwork.
Yeah.
It might be where, for example, in the context of financial planning advice, it might be where only one person attends the meeting.
Yeah.
And just says, oh, my wife says that's fine, or my husband says that's fine. It might be particularly actually with elders. So we're seeing a big rise in financial abuse for the elderly, where, you know, there's been some instances where people have literally been, you know, they're using their power of attorney responsibilities in a very illegal way or immoral way because they don't want to wait for their inheritance. And there's all sorts of cases that are going on around that. But also financial trauma is very interlinked to narcissistic abuse. So often the traits of narcissists are very similar, and often people who are in narcissistic relationships are unfortunately susceptible much more to financial abuse in those kind of relationships, because it's all about control, power over one, you know, over somebody else. So there are lots of red flags to look out for, and I feel like I have a responsibility where I'm teaching financial planners and advisors how to bring coaching into their businesses to look out for some of those red flags, so that, you know, if a partner's not turning up to their meeting, or if someone's ringing up and asking to make a large withdrawal from their investment portfolio, for example, just being able to spot some of those red flags and then knowing what to do to help people in that situation.
Yeah. So, you know, like traditionally, and this is something that I talk quite a lot about, traditionally, men have bigger pension pots, have bigger investments, and I think we assume, because we like to live in a fairy tale world, that that will all be equally split because we will be together until we die. Well, that is not necessarily the case. So is there a responsibility on people that are, you know, guiding and helping with those financial point of views to try and redress that balance of getting that pension split equally between the two different people, like before anything happens, and the investment to be equally split as well? It's an interesting debate, isn't it, as to how much responsibility the financial planners and advisors have in that sort of world.
Definitely, because there's so many intricacies of financial advice. For example, when you're doing tax planning, sometimes it could be more advantageous to have it in one person's name over another.
Yeah.
And so there's always like little nuances to specific people's situations. But nonetheless, the fact that women are living longer, we do need to be putting probably more in our pension pots than men do, because we are living longer. But also when it comes to things like divorce and separation, I think better education is needed to help women and men to understand that when they're going through the financial separation, that they do include pensions, because a lot of women I've spoken to have been like, oh, he just said he'd keep his and I'd keep the house, or I'd keep the car and he'd have his pension.
That's often the way, isn't it? That the woman will keep the house and the man will keep the pension.
Yeah, but then what's
the value of that pension?
Yeah,
20 years time.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, particularly if it's a final salary pension or something like that, which they're like golden handshakes nowadays. If it's guaranteed income, it's inflation proof for the rest of your life, that can be a really valuable asset. So, but because we don't consider them to be valuable, because we don't understand them, then often women will just discount them and just say, oh, well, you keep that and let's just talk about the house, because they see the value in the tangible assets like properties and cars and things like that. So it's definitely an area where we need to be kind of sharing more case studies and talking about those things, so that if somebody is going through that situation, they don't just dismiss really valuable pension pots that could actually make quite a big difference to their financial future.
So if flipping back to financial abuse, if somebody's listening to this and feeling like, oh, I think I'm in a bit of a situation where I've got stuff going on that I'm not feeling completely comfortable with, like what can they do? Like what are the next steps they can actively take to figure out what they could do or to escape from what they're in?
So again, this can be it is a very sensitive subject, and often women that are in these situations don't have family or friends or people that they can talk to, and the reason they don't is because often they've been manipulated to to get rid of friends, because they're particularly if they're in a narcissistic relationship, it might be that they've been told, well, don't be friends with this person because they said this about you, or they make up all these stories. So actually a lot of victims can be left feeling very isolated, and that's one of the biggest problems, is that who do they then reach out to? So I think the first thing is to acknowledge that there are support organizations that you can reach out to for support, and perhaps we can pop a link into some of those companies in the notes. But if you're sitting there right now and you're in that situation, if you're not able to reach out for support, then one of the tools that I've recently been I've been given some information on is I've just qualified to be a financial abuse specialist, and in the program that I was learning, they were talking about something called an escape plan, a financial escape plan. And I think it's really interesting to think about, okay, so if I just need to get out of this relationship, but I can't, because often it's the money, you haven't got access to money to be able to do that, is to think about creating yourself like a survival kit. And I was speaking to a lady recently who used this little kind of toolkit to get herself out of a situation. So it's things like being able to get access to some kind of finance. So that could even be whether you could get £5, £10 a week from your food shop, for example, and buy yourself a gift voucher in the supermarket or something that could just be put to one side, or a small amount of money that may not necessarily be noticed, because even if you did that over a period of time, that could just be enough to go and get yourself a train fare to somewhere that's going to protect you. It might be that you start thinking about creating a survival emergency kit, which might be some money wherever possible, a change of clothes for yourself and for your children, some spare car keys or something if you needed to access that car and maybe they've hidden the car keys away somewhere, a copy of your birth certificates for you and your children, your passports, details of medication, a copy of kind of credit card numbers, things like that that might come in handy, any legal documents like marriage certificates, those sorts of things, pictures of yourselves and your children, kind of important phone numbers, toiletries, almost like you were going to pack yourself an overnight bag, and but you were going on holiday somewhere and you needed to have all these important documents with you, so that if you really just had to leave in an emergency situation, you've got kind of the main things that you might need access to. But I would say the most important thing would be to find somebody that you can speak to, because it's often the finances that trap people. And out of domestic abuse cases, 99% of domestic violence, there is some kind of financial abuse involved, and that keeps people stuck in those situations.
Yeah, you can't underestimate. I mean, we talk about an emergency fund in a lot of different sort of circumstances. Like, it's the key thing that people need to have, particularly at the moment. But I think for any type of life situation you're in, you just never know when you're going to need that emergency money, like in an instant. And sometimes being able to get I know that sometimes being able to get a debt via a loan or a credit card is sometimes like there's no other way, but it's not always easy to get a hold of credit. Like, all the credit restrictions have closed in, particularly this year, so it's not that easy to get money that you're borrowing. So yeah, build up that emergency fund and yeah, keep it tucked away, for particularly in that situation. But I think just for regular people in this sort of uncertain time at the moment, I know I'm getting asked a lot of questions as to what actually happens if I lose my job next week or next month or in January. So I just think the emergency fund has just never been more important, has it? Because you need that money set aside for at least 3 months worth of essential expenses, and yeah, really strip it down to just your essential expenses, and you just need to have that money sat there in a different bank account, maybe, just so it's separate, so you're not dipping into it all the time, and just to give you that security that you've got something there if the worst does happen. And not only that sort of security from a you point of view, but also from a mental health point of view, that you will be okay for a few months if something does happen. So.
Yeah, I think what made the biggest difference for me is when I used to when I was in debt and I wanted to start having an emergency fund, putting one in place. The term rainy day funds and emergency funds just didn't work for me, didn't motivate me in any way at all. And one of the things I really love is to think about, what is the purpose of that emergency fund? If it's your financial stability fund or your security fund, it's going to give you that feeling of safety and security.
Yeah, exactly.
I actually found to name it that, so I call it my financial stability fund. So I know that if I take money out of my stability fund, which I haven't actually done, but if I did, then it would shake my financial foundations. And that for me is much more meaningful than an emergency fund. Because then what happens is, if we call it an emergency fund, if someone does have to dip into it, then what happens? They feel guilty, shameful, they judge themselves because they're like, I've taken money out of the emergency pot. So do you see what I mean? The meaning that we attach to that part, I think, is really important to think about. So think of like, relabel it something that means something. Yeah,
no, I think you're right. I think the moment I started thinking of it as my, like, I feel secure if that money is sat there, and I don't even dip into it. The only thing I'm debating over time is the right level of money that should be in there. Like, should it be 3 months worth of money? Should it be 6 months worth of money? I think this year has certainly brought me more to the point of, it needs to be more money than less. But I
think it depends on your insurances as well. Like, if you, your situation, if you're self-employed, have you got income protection? If you have, then your emergency fund or your stability fund may not need to be as high. Whereas if you haven't got income protection for whatever reason, maybe you can't have it because you've had medical conditions in the past, for example, or maybe you can't afford to pay the premium for the cost of income protection, then you'd need to have a bigger funds than if you did have insurance. So I always go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like, think about, in order to create strong foundations, like if you're building a house, you want to create strong positive feelings of safety and security. What would you need to do in order to have that? What could happen that could take you up the pyramid towards self-actualization and financial freedom that would tip you back to your foundation levels again? And often we get that wrong. A lot of women they're in a place of instability. Maybe they've got ebbs and flows in cash flow, they haven't got an emergency fund, and then they see somebody else that's making £10,000 a month in the online space, or running a program or a course
pretty
or
rare.
something.
I would say that's pretty rare.
And they look at other people, they compare themselves to Mr. and Mrs. Jones, and they think, oh well, that person must be earning this amount, or that person must be saving X amount. And so they then just look to try and copy what other people do without actually thinking about what's right for their situation.
No, good point. Okay, right, keep a check on time because we have been talking for quite a long time. The time's gone very quickly. So your business at the moment, the Money Panel, so tell me about all the different ways that you sort of operate as a business and how people can find you, because I know you've got ways that people can access your information for free, and you've got like Facebook groups and stuff, but then you've got like courses and membership stuff, haven't you? So
yeah, we try and offer different things to help people at different points in their life. So we have our podcast, In Her Financial Shoes. So we have a weekly podcast and a weekly blog that goes out. And then we have our free Facebook community. Facebook is where I tend to hang out most of the time. Although we're kind of trying to create a bit more content on some of the Instagram platforms as well, and YouTube. But yeah, we have lots of resources and things that can help people right at the start of their journey. And then we have a low-cost membership called the Money Circle membership that can help people who are looking to just take that next level up. And we have associate coaches in there now. We've got an accountant, we've got a coach, a business coach, and we've got a mortgage advisor in there who deals with anything to do with mortgages, debts, and protection. And we do masterclasses in there every month. And then we have a mastermind for business owners, and then we have online courses where we work together in small groups to go through the different stages of financial freedom and resiliency. And then in a bigger way, what we're trying to do is really help to bring bigger impact to the world. And that's where we are now working. We're going out to Richard Branson's retreat next year on Necker Island, and we're doing lots of work with other entrepreneurs.
Wow. What, you're actually going to Necker Island?
I'm going to Necker Island in September, I know.
Oh,
But that's part of a project where we're going to support other women in their Lead the Change projects to really help to have massive impact and scale in the world with what they're doing, what we're doing. And so we have a training program now where we're teaching other people the importance of financial coaching and how to integrate it into their work.
Yeah, wow. It really sounds like you've got huge, big plans, but what I really like about it is you're sort of covering it from the sort of micro level of on a one-to-one basis, and reading content and stuff and groups, Facebook groups, but then you've got this like huge big plan and to really change the world for so many people. So women, because women we do need a bit of a helping hand and guidance, because traditionally it's not been so open to us, so we're opening those doors. Oh, yes. That's wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on my podcast. How do people find you on social media and all those kind of things?
Best place is to come into our Facebook community, or if you want to kind of subscribe to our newsletters, there's a little quiz that you can complete on our website. If you go to themoneypanel.co.uk/quiz, and we'll take you through a short quiz to understand what your relationship to money is. And then we produce content that's relevant to that particular relationship. So whether you're an overspender or an underspender. So we try and produce different content for, to help you at the stage that you're at.
Yeah.
So yeah, that would be the best place to come and find us.
So the Facebook group is the Money Panel.
The Facebook group is called Money Advice Expert for Women. But if you go to the website, the details are all on the website, themoneypanel.co.uk.
Cool, wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on. I think that was a really good conversation with we touched on some quite difficult areas that I just think if anybody out there is listening and trapped in a bit of a difficult situation, that there are ways out, and I think your resources on your website will be particularly helpful for people. So thank you ever so much, Catherine.
Thank you for having me.
I will speak to you soon.
Thanks, Lynn.